Welcome to another of the eBiology Teacher Podcasts. I'm Mr. Doc, and I want to talk to you today about themes in biology. Now, normally when you think about themes, you're thinking about literature or theme songs, whatever. But at the beginning of biology, I like to talk about some of the things that are going to kind of rear their ugly head when we're talking about biology. There are three main topics. And these topics really kind of flow through everything. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about plants or animals or whatever. These things kind of come up almost every time. So what I think if we do is we spend a little time to kind of get to know these themes. It makes things a little easier to understand, and we sort of start to expect things, and it gives us a better and broader understanding of what it is to understand biology. So let's go ahead and get started. As I've said, there are three, and despite the variety of subjects that we're going to cover in CP biology and even in X biology, ranging from plants and animals, which most people think are completely unrelated, to microbiology, to evolution, to whatever, there are three reoccurring things that always seem to come up. There is, number one, unity and diversity, all at the same time. There's interdependence, and then there's the evolution of how life changes over time. So let's go ahead and get started with the first one. Let's look at each one of them and what it really means. Well, number one, unity and diversity. Now, if you look at those two words, you first think, wow, those are antonyms. Those are the opposites of each other. And to some extent that might be true, but not in biology. You see, there are millions and millions of different organisms on this planet, each of them unique in their very own way. They depend on different things, and they behave in different ways and whatnot. But despite the large number of different species we have on the planet, all of them have something in common. If you recall, the last time we were here, we talked about the 7 characteristics of living things. Well, whether you're talking about a plant or a fungus or a human or a hamster or an amoeba, those 7 characteristics of life are true of all of those. Okay, so we're talking about cellular organization and reproduction, heredity, metabolism, homeostasis, responsiveness, and the ability to grow and develop. No matter what differences we may have with other species, those 7 things we have in common. So there is unity there. As a matter of fact, we talked about how we all have DNA. Well, DNA has 4 letter codes, okay, and we'll get into that when we talk about genetics, but they have A, G, T, and C. That's the 4 codes, and it's the order of how those happen that determine what we look like and different characteristics. Even in trees or in algae, it has the same 4 codes. So we have the same kind of DNA, it's just that the DNA is written in a different order. So that is really a very common thing for things that are incredibly different, because I don't know, last time I looked at algae, I didn't think I had much in common with it, but I really do, because the DNA of that algae is made up of the same 4 letter codes as the DNA that makes me up. It's just in a different order. So that's what we refer to as unity and diversity. So when we study biology, it's often easier to start at the bottom where everything is sort of very, very common and work our way apart. If we can understand the things that everybody has in common, it's very easy to start to kind of separate them. And that's kind of what the phylogenetic tree of life shows us, is that as we go up, we start with these common things, and as we can start to separate them. And actually we're going to talk about that when we talk about how we classify living things, because when we classify them, we're going to start with the things they have in common and then work apart with the things that are different. Now, I'm going to take a little sidetrack here, because a lot of times people don't think that biology and literature or biology and English can get along, because they're 2 completely different subjects. I disagree. There was a writer by the name of John Donne, and he wrote this. Let me read it to you. He wrote, "All mankind is of one author and is of one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. As therefore the bell rings to the sermon, calls not upon the preacher only, but also upon the congregation to come. So this bell calls us all No man is an island entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. All right? All right, Mr. Doc's lost it, right? Now he's quoting literature in biology class. He's got to be crazy. Well, bear with me for a minute. Let's look at see what John Donne was saying here. First of all, he says that all mankind is of one author in one volume. He's saying there that we all really have a lot of common threads. He also says that when one man dies, the chapter isn't torn out but translated. This is true. When we die, our bodies decay. We return those nutrients to the soil, and they are translated into a different thing for someone else to use. When there's waste, the bugs and the trees and everything, they use that waste for themselves. They translate it into something useful for them, even though it's somebody else's waste. So far we've got two things that John Donne was right on. So he says that if that's true, then the things that affect the tree affect me. The things that call the preacher, call the congregation, the things that affect one living organism also affect me. So he's saying that we're kind of interdependent. And he closes that by saying, no man is an island entire of itself, meaning that no man can really exist by itself. We need other organisms for survival, right? And he says that if something destroys or diminishes mankind, then it diminishes me. So when something happens naturally in biology, that bell not only tolls for whatever it's working on, it tolls for you too, meaning that everything is sort of connected together in this sort of great circle of life. No, sorry. Yeah, I've lost it. Okay, whatever. But anyway, John Donne gets it right. He says that, yeah, we all have a lot of things in common, and we are really connected because when something happens to one thing, it really can affect me down the road. So that's our next theme, is interdependence. You see, organisms live in interdependent communities where they depend on each other for habitat or for food or for shelter or for safety or for any number of reasons. This means that most organisms depend on at least one other, if not more than one other, for survival. Fleas depend on your dog or your cat for a place to live and for food. We're dependent on plants and animals for our food. As a matter of fact, I challenge you to think about something you've eaten in the past 24 hours that didn't in some way come from a plant or an animal, right? Sugar. Anything with sugar in it came from sugar cane or beets, actually, and those are plants. Chocolate comes from the cacao tree, the roasted beans of the roasted pods of a cacao tree. Pop-Tarts. Well, there's wheat in the breading and there's fruit in the middle. That's two completely different plants altogether. So we really need other organisms for our survival. But plants depend on dead organisms for their nutrients. And here's the other thing. We always talk about how we need plants because they give us oxygen. But if you know anything about photosynthesis, you know that these plants need carbon dioxide. And we produce a lot of carbon dioxide. So yeah, we need the plants and they need us. That's interdependence. We depend on each other. All right. The last theme I want to talk about is the evolution of life. Now, there is a unit on evolution, to be sure, and we're going to talk about that separately. But what I want to talk about is a theme that kind of goes through all sections of biology, and that is that the populations have changed over time due to inherited characteristics that are preferred by one or the other. So basically what evolution does is explain why we're so diverse. How did living things become to be so diverse? Well, it's pretty simple. The characteristics of an organism make them more or less fit for a certain circumstance or a certain environment. The more fit they are, the more likely they are to survive. The less likely they are, fit they are, the less likely they are to survive. And we all know this, that if you don't survive, you can't reproduce. So the things that are more fit not only survive but reproduce more. Let me give you an example. The jackrabbit is a brownish gray rabbit. You see them all over Indiana. They're everywhere. Well, a long time ago, those migrate to the north into Canada. Well, there's a lot of snow and it's cold, so when a brown rabbit's sitting on a big old white pile of snow, it's pretty easy for a predator to see. So they got picked off very easily. Well, what happened is the mating habits of the snowshoe hare started to modify favoring those with lighter colored fur. So the offspring would have even lighter colored fur. And as we go through the generations, the lighter colored fur was always preferred because those are the ones that are not only more suited for the environment, but those are the ones that survive, because the ones with brown fur or dark fur got picked off pretty easily. So what happens here is that we start to develop a lighter color, and eventually snowshoe hares develop from jackrabbits because they ended up getting thicker white fur. White fur allows them to blend in with the environment. They evolved to be more suited for their environment, less likely to be picked off by predators, and more likely to stay warm because of the thick fur. So jackrabbits and snowshoe hares are two different species, but they actually have a lot in common because they've separated based on the conditions that caused them to do that. So that's one of those themes in biology that we're going to see a lot. Species sort of come about because things change and they need to adapt or they die. Pretty simple. So let's look at our objectives. There are three important themes here that we want to talk about: interdependence, unity and diversity, and evolution. How can things be diverse yet be unified? Well, remember, the 7 characteristics of life are true for all living things. So it doesn't matter whether you're a piece of algae, a single-celled paramecium, or a complex lion or a gorilla. It doesn't matter. You have the same 7 things in common with life. But after that, that's when we start to get different, and that's how we sort of start to kind of classify things. How are living things interdependent? Well, let's say, for example, a horse. A horse eats, or a cow even. A cow eats grass off the ground, and a cow excretes waste. Well, that waste actually helps the grass to grow, because in that waste there are some things that the grass needs to really be full. So as the cow eats the grass, it provides waste. The waste provides the grass with things it needs, and the cow eats the grass later. It's sort of the circle of life. Copyright Disney 2000, whatever. And lastly, summarize why evolution is important theme in biology. Well, evolution explains why we're different. How did we get so different? And it can also tell us a lot about our history. If we are different, something caused that difference to arise. And if we look back, we can sort of trace back and kind of get an idea of how things have changed, not only biologically, but also naturally. All right? So there's a little review on biological themes and what it means. I hope you found it helpful. Keep it here for, or keep checking back here for more podcasts on our next unit. I think the next thing we're going to start talking about is taxonomy, meaning now that we know that things are unified but diverse, how do we classify them? How do we put them in categories and know what the differences are? It's a lot of information. How do we organize it? That's what we're going to be talking about next. So I'll see you right here on the podcast. I'm Mr. Doc. Bye.